let me start with a question. So I wanted to ask you, who's responsible for how good is the UI or the product? Who's to blame if it's really bad? And who should get all the recognition, all the glory if it's great? If it's tricky to ask this question in such a room, but yeah, it's because it's a tricky question indeed. I think if everybody here has something in common, is that we care about our practice. We are here because we really care about the quality of the product we put out. We care about the quality of the UIs and the products that we're working in. And if we want to put out great products, it's clear by now that we definitely need great collaboration. We've had Anna kicking off the day today talking about accessibility and how it is both a developer and a designer effort. I think also just the talk right before me with research and repositories, there's signs everywhere that we need to be pretty much aligned in the work that we do, and still it feels like it's these two separate worlds. So yeah, we kind of need to get along. But this is easier said in, this is easier in theory than in practice. And this is something I've experienced myself. I really like theory, I really like processes and frameworks and methodology. I mean, I'm a strategic designer, that's really our stuff. But when I started to work suddenly in a software agency, I started to have to develop for the first time with developers. Have to collaborate for the first time with developers. I started to realize how complex this problem is, how difficult it is to take it from theory to practice. That said, again, I told you, I really like theory, so I thought, how should I tackle this? And I just came up with a framework. So we're gonna look at this framework. We're gonna see if it makes sense to talk about collaboration in theory terms, and also we're gonna look at how to take it into practice. So let's get started. So I was with my team, and we were trying to implement better collaboration between the brand new design team that had to fit into all these processes that were in place for a pre-existing development team. So we started to pile up all these tools that are known in the industry to be the main tools for collaboration, right? So design systems, we've also heard of them already today, design tokens, the handoff meeting, etc. And then I started to realize, so I'm piling up all these things, and it almost feels like I'm building this structure, but I'm missing something. Like it almost feels like it's a pile of bricks. Like these building blocks are there, but there's something else in between that is missing. I don't have a sound structure of collaboration if I just have those things randomly throughout the process. So this was the image I had in my mind all this time, trying to improve the collaboration in my own team. It's like I've set up these things, or I'm setting up these things, and it feels like this wall that is falling and does not have any binding thing, there's some kind of glue missing in there. So that is what in my brain I think about as the in-between stuff. Of all these main building blocks of collaboration, there's some kind of in-between stuff, some kind of glue, or again, thinking about the wall is like the mortar or the concrete mix that needs to be in place so that these very valuable tools actually work, actually help us establish that sound collaboration. So with this in mind, what does it take to collaborate? I'm going to take you through this framework I've put together, and I'm very open for all kind of critiques. Again, it's a framework, so that's already a bit sketchy. We are talking about a very human, complex topic. But let's look at it. So if we start from the beginning, what is to collaborate, right? So if we have the timeline of any kind of project, you start from the very beginning till the end, till delivery. If you think about collaboration across that timeline, you can think about going from zero collaboration, like we don't talk, or we never did, like we don't talk anymore, or never did, to feeling part of a community, if that's even possible. So in a really simple terms, the first thing you need to start doing to collaborate is to talk to each other, right? So pretty simple. First level of collaboration would be communication. I think of this level as level 1 of this framework, where we have these kind of tools and this possibility of creating a shared language so that we can start talking to each other. Then how do you go from that to the next point? Well, the next point for me is to actually start working together. And I call it collaboration, which is a bit misleading because there's still like a third step to go through. But yeah, you have to start working with each other. And how do you do that? How do you go past just talking to each other? Well, you need some kind of process that binds the whole thing together, that really brings us together into different moments throughout the production or development process so that we can actually collaborate, right? And then, again, it's weird. So collaboration is just the middle layer. Why is this? Well, only working together doesn't cut it. Collaboration is quite complex. So we need to start thinking about building alignment. And what I mean by that is like building this shared culture between developers and designers, building this mindset or this way of working that help us come closer together through the process, help us implement these tools, follow this process, and properly bind the whole thing, have that collaboration, to a point that we would feel almost part of our own community, a community that includes both developers and designers. Now, sometimes it feels like we are these two separate, parallel communities. So how can you implement this in your work? How can you take this to your team or to this one other person you work closely with? Some of you may collaborate every day with somebody from the other side, or maybe part of a team that is part of a bigger team that has to collaborate with the other side. However it is, I am hoping that this framework is broad enough in a way that you can take it, you can take the base of it, and you can bring it to your practice, bring it to your team, and implement it in the way that it makes sense to you. So take everything I'm going to say with a grain of salt. So level 1 is tools and language, like I said. So in practice, so before we start collaborating, like I said, we need to start communicating. So in practice, we have a lot of different things that we need in place to properly communicate. First thing is we need some common spaces where to meet. And this can be metaphorical, of course. It can be digital. But we need we need to create these places where both developers and designers are going to be together, and they're going to have some kind of exchange. They're going to be able to talk. We also need a shared language. And when that's not even possible, we need some kind of translations from design to code, or the other way around. And the shared language will be the ideal step. Like, we need to start defining this way of talking that means that we understand each other. And this is, of course, a technical shared language that I'm referring to. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail. What can we use to create all these things? So with common spaces, we have a lot of software tools nowadays that are really helpful. And this probably makes more tangible what I mean by common spaces. So we have things like Figma or Sketch or any other UX tool you use where we can have a design file and invite developers to see what we've built, and we can gather comments in there. We can set it up in many different ways to create this meeting point. We also have specific handoff tools, software tools like Zeppelin. You also have Vercel, that is a developer tool, but allows designers to put comments on websites that are already, let's say, up and running, so that you can do some kind of QA on the go. There are many different ones. I even include Jira here as an example of ticketing system, because I think creating requirements that both speak to design and development is really important. It's a meeting point again. It's a place where we can both see, okay, this is what we had to do. Now, for translations, back to these software tools, we are actually in a really good point for this. There are many different options, and Figma, it's going strong with these. We all know probably about the inspect mode and the possibility of prototyping now within the same UX tool. This didn't used to be the case. Like, now people are quite spoiled with Figma, that we have everything in there, but people used to have to do these flat designs, right? And then prototype them somewhere else. Now we can communicate on this shared space, and we can give translations to our developers as designers. They can check things on the inspect mode. I know it's not perfect. They also have the dev mode. I also know it's not perfect, but it's a start, right? It brings us together to a certain point. So if we're thinking about common spaces and these translations and Figma, it's pretty easy to jump into the design file and think about it as this tool of collaboration. I wanted to talk a little bit about the design file because it can be a great tool, indeed. It can be, if you set it up well, it can be really inviting for your developer as a designer. They can go in there, they can understand what you've put together, they can read through your annotations, they can use, again, the tools of the UX software tool to do their own translations. But if used wrong, it can be a collaboration nightmare. And I see this really often. I see it in my team. I've even done this. Like, I've handed off a file and hoped for the best. And it just breaks trust. It really does not create that common space. It does not offer the translations or the common language. So it's important that as designers, we take responsibility over the design file, and we exercise empathy over our design file user. Your developer is your design file user. So you have to set it up thinking about that. What's the best way for them to go through things, to read through things, and ask them, right? Like, what do you need to find in there? What kind of links can I put next to my designs? And this is just an example of all these things we have to take into account in collaboration. So, yeah. So shared language. How do we create a shared language between development and design? Well, I really love the idea of naming conventions, of course, because I'm not a UX designer myself. I came from product, I came from strategy, and I kind of landed in this like operations, almost management role, right? So many things didn't mean much to me at the very beginning. So I had to learn a lot of this new nomenclature of the digital world. And of course, there's 1,000 ways to refer to the same thing. At the very beginning, I thought it was only me that was getting lost in translation when I started to realize that everybody was. The really skilled developers and the really skilled UX designers were also getting lost in translation just by not having these shared naming conventions as a team. And again, it's so simple, but yet still it happens in really mature and really new teams. So naming conventions are important. Start working on them with your team just by creating an Excel file, and putting in there how you're going to name everything from the smallest component and element to bigger things. Build a glossary of terms like tools that you use, specific terms to your company, etc. And then we have design tokens. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but I can tell you that, for example, coming from a small team, I don't come from this big product company where we have unlimited resources. We have found our own way of setting up our own structure of design tokens by using Figma, at the beginning by using Token Studio, that is a plugin for Figma, and now by using Figma variables. That seems to be quite promising for this. It has been an amazing process, not only for the designers to have to come closer to the tech team and talk with them, like, how do you want me to refer to things on my file? How should I name things for them to make sense to you? How can I bring it as close as possible to Tailwind, for example? But also for the development team to understand what are our limitations as designers, what things we don't know, and also to teach us a lot of things and for them to learn from us. So yeah, design tokens, really valuable. Overall, these things kind of offer you this shared single source of truth, which is a mouthful, so that's why I put it there like that. But it's just important that both sides of a team, or if you're just working one-on-one with a developer or with a designer, that you have that space where you can find where you can get the feeling that you are both fully aligned by just reading that. I think tools like design systems are obviously providing this to teams, and design tokens are fully intertwined with design systems. But also the shared ticket and requirement system. Going back to Jira, and my company does not even use Jira. You can use whatever. You can use Notion, right? You can use anything, but just create this system where requirements are written down, where agreements from one team and the other are written down, and where everybody feels like that documentation also belongs to them. So there's that shared source of truth together. This is just a preview because I'm not gonna go in depth into all of these. You've had speakers already today with way more knowledge on design systems than me. And you can find amazing talks online on design tokens and resources. But this is just to say that tools are really important. They're really valuable. They create that first meeting point, that first conversation. And yeah, just find the ones that work for your team. Yeah. Okay, so to start communicating, we need to have these tools that bridge the gap between the two of us. That's the very first step, right? So in a nutshell, think about building this in your own situation. Think about creating a common space, physical, metaphorical, and think about providing translations to your other half, and also ultimately making this shared language or this shared single source of truth. Okay, so that said, without the next step, so without this in-between stuff, we are again referring back to stacking all these fundamentals of collaboration, but we are missing a binding element, right? You could have a perfect design file, you could have design tokens, and you could have a design system, but I think in my experience, that would not offer you the best level of collaboration in the long term. So let's look at what can we do to ensure that the structure doesn't fall flat. What does it take to go from communication to collaboration? So going back to the framework, we would jump into level 2. So how can we work together if the process makes us work apart? Sorry. Level 2, it's the process. So the first thing I realized once we started to implement all these things is, well, we are still functioning in two different separate processes, right? Like I jump into the design process and I go from beginning to end, and then I hand off, I give away my thing for this other team or for this other colleague to work on it. That doesn't feel very collaborative, right? That doesn't feel like it's working together. So, and this is what we have with the design handoff. I think about it as like the collaboration fallacy, because at the very beginning, I was like, oh, this is gonna be amazing. I'm gonna just nail the handoff. We're gonna implement the best handoff ever in our team. And then you realize, yeah, but still, I'm just throwing something to the next team, right? Like, what's that? I think about it now more as this. Like, the promise of the handoff is that it's going to be this Olympics level of relay, you know, like I give you this and it goes perfect. When in reality, it feels more like everything's going wrong. What's happening? Why are we lost in translation or in the relay? So yeah, why is this happening? Well, many times the handoff goes like this, like, dear developer, this is the stuff, figure it out. Ask me questions if you want. And yeah, and that means that it becomes somewhat of a meeting point at best, or a simple transfer at minimum, right? So it breaks these two processes. It doesn't really help us collaborate closely. How can we do things better? Well, I also wanted to include this quote because I think it's really powerful, because I am a designer. And I really try to get as much information from the perspective of the developer on this. And yeah, so Brad Frost is gonna say it better than me. The process doesn't help the developer, right? You are being handed over something down the line, and it doesn't feel like you're being taken care or involved in the product decisions. I think that's the first thing we kind of need to fix. So yeah, if we want to start collaborating, we need to actually work together under one process. And that's why this is a really important level. What can we do to fix this? Well, we definitely need to start involving developers from the very beginning and earlier, you know? Like, as early as possible. And we also need to share product decisions. And that's a little bit more complicated in practice again than in theory. So how can we do this? Looking at a process again, we have the beginning, but we also have the stuff before the beginning. So this is the project scoping. So when you're going to start a project, there's a lot of discussions that have to happen on feasibility or on requirements, etc. And I think nowadays, most of the times, developers and designers are not together in the room with the PM or with the salesperson or whoever is in charge of this. This is already an important point where you have to bring in the whole team together, where you have to definitely bring in the developer as well. And it starts the alignment. This is when we define the problem to solve, the scope, and the requirements, and the feasibility considerations. And that's really important to go through. So problem, requirements, feasibility. Then we go into the beginning, the start, right? And we have to have some kind of onboarding for the team where we, again, align with everybody, a project kickoff where we share goals, we confirm the requirements, and overall the timeline, dependencies, and the collaboration specifics, because there's a lot of specifics to collaboration, like how do you want me to talk to you, in which channels, etc. This is stuff that we have to define from the very beginning. Then we go into feasibility checks and align processes that have to happen during the entire process. So feasibility checks. This is important for designers. They have to talk with their developer throughout their exploration process, throughout their design process, so that they make sure that what they are building makes sense, but also so that they start creating this shared ownership with the developer. The decisions are shared if I'm already involving you in my own design decisions, right? And then we go into the handoff. It can still happen. It's not terrible, but it should happen when all these other things have been included also. So here it's just important that you explain as a designer your design choices. So what was the problem that you were trying to solve? And the reason that you solve it that way. This is information that developers very rarely get, right? And if we recognize that they deserve that, I think that already creates this path towards a collaborative relationship. Last but not least, you also have the possibility of doing this design QA. So as the developer is building stuff, that you are very highly involved as a designer, and you are giving feedback as well. So the developer also has to be open to receiving this, right? And facilitate it. So you can do this again with Jira or with Vercel or many other tools. Find the one that works for you. Last but not least, it's really important that we have some kind of moment where we meet together as a team or as a pair and have a retrospective on the process and the collaboration, write down the things that have to be improved, the things that worked for each other. This starts building on that relationship, that rapport, and that trust ultimately. So what worked well and what should we change? This is the overview of a process that could lead to more collaboration. But what does it take to go to the next level, right? So the process was the key. Now, what are we missing? Are we still missing stuff? What is that final part of the framework? So if it was about aligning under one process, building the product together, what else was missing? If we have shared goals, shared meetings, and shared product decisions, it's definitely not about how many meetings we have in this process. It's about who is involved in them, when are they happening, and definitely what we do during these meetings. And this is the beauty of it, that you end up with these kind of multiple touch points where the two people that are most important in the product are involved. So we hopefully go from these two separate processes, we hopefully avoid it, and we hopefully go into a full process. But there are some shortcomings, and this is what I want to wrap up with. So the in-between stuff, what I was still missing, that's the level 3 of the workshop, of the framework. So, and this is where I reached the impasse. Like, should this be a framework? Can I even make this into a framework? I'm missing something else that is not about processes or tools. So that took me to level 3, mindset. And this is a bit more complex. I'm gonna just tell you a couple of things that I think are important for a collaborative mindset, but this is an effort of everybody to apply to their personal relationships. So the collaboration mindset, you have to be willing to share the ownership of your work, right? You have to be open to letting the other person participate in your process. You also have to respect each other's craft. So that's really important. We are here to build trust on each other. And to do that, we have to acknowledge that what the other person is doing is really important and it's complicated. And I want to learn about it, which leads me to this. Be willing to make compromises. If I respect you, I also am willing to make, meet in the middle and make a compromise on a choice on a product. Also, you have to stay curious and open to learn because we both have many skills that are complementary to each other. And if we can learn from each other's knowledge, we become stronger as a developer and as a designer. You have to put in the work, last but not least, put in the work and get to know each other. Because we are people, so you have to build real rapport and real trust. We are not machines, so you have to actually try to get to know the other person on your team, and the collaboration will feel a lot more natural and flawless. So yeah, this is level 3 mindset. And before I finish, I just have some specifics per discipline. As a designer, you should really try to engage with the technical aspects of your work. We should be able to think about production, not only the visual and behavioral aspect of what we do. And you also have to guard fidelity, but acknowledge its limitations. Fidelity, it's a complex thing. It makes sense for us as designers to design things pixel perfect, but for the developer, that's not. So just understand the limitations and talk with them about it. And also just is your kind of role to be the facilitator of these, because we have those skills. We are meant to be able to adapt to somebody else's process and to facilitate that somebody learns about ours. As a developer, you kind of have to connect your work to the product level. You have to stop being isolated in your process and try to fight your way into the decision-making moments, right? Into the rooms where the product or the interface is actually pretty much decided up front. And also you have to guard the feasibility, definitely, but explain yourself in the process. I think it's really important that as developers, you're open to explaining designers why things don't work or why things don't make sense, because you make them a better designer. And more importantly, you're gonna make them a better collaborator for you, the more they learn. And lastly, take ownership of design translation tools. I think the more and more we see all these tools facilitating collaboration, the more it's important for developers to also realize this is their responsibility, it's also for them. So also take ownership over them. So what does it take to collaborate? Going back to the initial question. For me, it's about this, but again, you have to take it to your own practice, see if it makes sense for you, find the right ingredients for each of these things. And I know that not everybody has the has the agency to implement this in their company. So that's why I made this. Take a picture of it, send it to your manager, to your operations, whatever. Stalk them on their chat, on Slack. Say, when shall we start with this? Just put some social pressure, because it's important that as teams and as every member of the team, we already take agency in changing the culture. I just want to end with my main takeaway from this process and from trying to map this framework, trying to put together this talk. And surprisingly, it was that, it's a human effort and it's a human issue. So it's about respecting the other half and really taking them through your process and building together a partnership, more than about tools and software and even processes. So thanks a lot, guys.